Welcome to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues of fast growing businesses. If you're a business owner or operator looking for practical tips and solutions to scaling your business in a sustainable manner, you're in the right place. Now here's your hostess, Alicia Butler-Pierre.
Today's episode is brought to you by Equilibria Incorporated, an operations management firm giving fast-growing companies tools to increase their capacity with less chaos. Learn more at eqbsystems.com. This season, we're focusing on the COO, the Chief Operating Officer. And joining me today in the ATL, Atlanta, Georgia, that is Adam Hayes. And we're going to talk about the importance of gathering customer data to drive both operational excellence and continuous improvement in your company. Be sure to stick around to the end of the show. I'm going to tell you how you can ask me a question about operations and get it answered here live. Adam, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Alicia. I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here today.
I'm glad we're both here, considering what's going on right now. And what's so crazy is I was preparing for this interview. I couldn't help but think it seems like a lifetime ago when we met, but as of this recording, which is April 2020, it was just last month.
It's a lot has changed. Yeah, the great leveling field of coronavirus.
Oh my gosh. It literally seems like it was months and months ago when we first met. So for those of you listening, Adam and I, we met at a local Atlanta COO forum event. And it was, I don't know if this happened with you, Adam, but I remember that event was really early in the morning. And as soon as I left that event, something just told me to check my phone because I had a day full of other events and activities to attend, and everything just started getting canceled.
Yeah, that was sort of the last 48 hours before the Earth got knocked off its axis. You're right.
It was just unbelievable. So yes, as of this recording, we are in the midst again of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, although our meeting and our encounter with each other was very brief, it was a very fascinating conversation for me because you have such a long and successful career in operations. And I was wondering if we could start off with you first telling us more about your company, is it pronounced Mesa?
Mesa, yes.
Mesa. Okay, so can you tell us more about Next Mesa and what you do there?
Sure. So I do consulting and business advisory services really across all sectors. My experience and my primary background over the years with my career was in the real estate field. So work related to redevelopment of real estate properties, and specifically with respect to the due diligence of those properties and the environmental aspects. So spent a lot of my career working on assessing and cleaning up all kinds of different messes that people had made over the years at different kinds of properties. And then that evolved as I partnered up with my MBA colleague and ran operations for a food manufacturing facility. So I've been involved with everything from raw dirt all the way to final product manufacturing.
How on earth did you make, okay, this is interesting. So it's going back to your career kind of starting out in real estate. So I understand that because you have a degree in civil engineering.
That's
right?
correct, yes.
Okay, so I understand the environmental aspect of that as well, because I think you also have a master's degree in environmental science or something?
That's correct. I've got a civil degree from Clemson University and a master's from Georgia Tech.
Okay, so I've been doing my research, Adam, and so that makes sense to me. But how on earth did you go from what sounds like remediation and cleaning up messes, as you described it, to running operations for a food manufacturing company?
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot. I'm kind of unusual in that sense. So through the course of my engineering career, I had at one point started my own practice, ran that for a number of years and sold it to another company here in the Atlanta area and stayed on with it and was gradually assuming more and more responsibility just with operations of that business. And at that point, I went back. I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess, with education. And I decided to do an executive MBA, which I did at Kennesaw State. And that was the executive program, weekends, nights, every other hour of the day. You got a full-time job and a family. And I met Keith Schroeder. He was on my team. So day one of the program, he was randomly assigned to my team, sitting in the seat next to me. And Keith has a culinary background as an executive chef. And we wrote the business plan for High Road Ice Cream as part of our MBA program at Kennesaw. So Keith and I became friends, and as time passed and his company was growing, he reached out to me and asked if I'd come on board and try to help run operations for the company as it was starting to really hit a pretty steep growth scale. So that's the only way that a civil engineer that I know of gets involved with food manufacturing.
By happenstance.
Yeah.
Now, with your company Next Mesa, are you serving as a fractional COO? Is it fair to make that assumption?
I do some work. I wouldn't say fractional COO, although that's something that I may do down the line. Most of my advisory work that's in the business sense is kind of more from in a consultant type arrangement, not sort of a fractional or full-time position. And then I continue to service my other clients, who include a network of developers and attorneys, business owners, anybody that might be doing a project with the engineering work.
Okay, so are you still involved with High Road Ice Cream as well?
I'm no longer with High Road. They reached a point where they were ready to do some changes what they were doing, and with the timing was right. So I'm back to doing my own practice here in the engineering world.
Now, do you find with so kind of I'm sorry we're going back and forth between Next Mesa and High Road, but with your clientele with Next Mesa, are you finding that you still at some point or another have conversations around operations and why it's so important to make sure that your processes and systems are turnkey and as streamlined as possible?
Yeah, absolutely, Alicia. The thing that you learn as you get more involved with operations is that if somebody reaches out to you, and I don't really care what kind of business you're in, whatever sort of service or consulting you might be providing to a client, you're doing them a disservice if you don't understand the operation of their business. And so it's not uncommon for, especially in kind of the technical fields with engineers and other people like that, to kind of get a little myopic on services. But the truth is, you really need to go through the operational factors, and everything that client is doing is interrelated to their operations ultimately. So if they have, for example, might be a simple regulatory compliance matter that they need a little advice on, understanding all the other interconnected pieces of that and not just filling out paperwork to satisfy the regulator is really the right way to approach things. Another example that comes to mind is work related to sustainability or energy efficiencies. Again, people will look at that and say, well, it's really nice. We should have a more sustainable business. But the truth is that the operations, the expenses, the dollars that are involved with that, the impacts on the employees really are all just as critical as just saying, hey, we're going to be green or a green company. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of different things that play into that for sure.
I'm so glad you said that, Adam, because you kind of hit on a sore spot for me whenever I am hiring or considering hiring another consultant. And I'll just put it out there. Sales is definitely my Achilles heel, always has been. I'm a work in progress, but I can admit it. And what I've found is that over the years, when I've talked to people who specialize in sales and maybe different aspects of marketing, like let's say PR, public relations, something like that, it's always interesting to me that they don't take the time to understand my company's operations. So I love the fact that you just said, the fact that regardless of what type of consulting that you're doing your client a disservice if you don't understand how they actually operate.
It's really critical. And I think, some of it comes with business philosophy, some of it just comes with experience and years of work and dealing with different customers. But, a lot of times when a customer comes to you with a problem, the truth is that they're running their business, and whatever it is that they're seeking help with is something that they basically don't know what they don't know.
Hmm.
And that's why they've called you. Otherwise, they would have done it themselves. And so they're busy and they're focused on whatever it is that their business enterprise provides. And you really need to understand that. You really need to know what it is that they do. And then you can come up with the right solution to really try to help their business.
Agreed. And so this kind of ties in very nicely to what what we said the focal point of this interview would be on, and that is the importance of really understanding your customer. Whether you are head of operations within a company, or maybe you are a consultant and whatever type of consultant you are, and you have to understand your customers' operations. Can we talk about this a little bit more, Adam? This idea of gathering customer data, and then once you gather that data, how you actually analyze it to make decisions about how to improve your service offering, your product offering, and the operations that go in delivering those products and services.
Yeah, so I think that where I start on that is understanding who your customers are, and we always think of it as the person that we write a proposal to and ultimately, hopefully, receive a check from. But depending on where you are, your customers can be internal or external. And so, as a COO, you have to find that balance between what's usually your two key customers being your CEO and your CFO, and understand that there's a tension all the time between making sure that you're running a predictable and reliable operation, managing that against the costs and all the financial impacts that your CFO or controller wants to see, and then also satisfying the need for continued growth and innovation that's likely coming from your CEO. That's their job. Their job is to keep pushing the envelope and dreaming and bringing new things to the table. And so internally, that's the way you have to look at it. Externally, the client, they can be anywhere in the chain of their organization. So once again, knowing what they're doing and asking probing questions is pretty critical step.
Indeed. And, so being that you, again, have a civil engineering background as well as an MBA, you obviously understand the business of being in business, as well as the importance of infrastructure to keep things moving smoothly. But, with civil engineering, that's all about transportation type or transportation related or real estate related infrastructure. But let's tie this exercise of gathering customer data and using that to, again, make decisions from an operations standpoint to business infrastructure. Now, if you're listening to this show for the first time, business infrastructure is a system for how you link your people, processes, and tools to ensure growth in a profitable and sustainable way. Adam, can you share an example of, or maybe even give us some generic advice for the types of people, processes, and tools that you recommend as you gather customer intelligence and then analyze it, and then later take that analysis and convert it into better products and services?
You have to start somewhere. If you're running your business and thinking about growing, you have to always be thinking about continuous improvement. And it's really hard to make progress with continuous improvement if you don't know where you're starting. You just have to have a
Mm,
baseline, and that doesn't mean necessarily that it's complex. And I think too often, in today's world, you can get online and you can search for tools and software, and people will talk to you all day about all of the capabilities and everything else, but it can often be as simple as a clipboard and a pencil. that you start tracking a handful of key performance indicators that really drive your business. I don't care what business you're in, labor is going to be one of them. That's usually one of the most important and expensive pieces of any business. So tracking labor, whether you're tracking that in a manufacturing setting and in terms of throughput of units per minute or units per hour. In a service business, it's often billable hours. In any business, there's overtime to keep track of, and there's understanding that overtime isn't always an evil thing. You know, there some amount of overtime is better than carrying too many full-time people sometimes. So it just depends on that. But you have to start somewhere to develop the understanding of your business, depending on the complexity of the business. So that can be clipboards and pencils to spreadsheets to ERP systems. And I've been experienced and worked through all of those through the course of my career, and understanding that you really need to get started, just get started, because you can spend an eternity working with a complex ERP implementation and 12 months later realize I still don't have any usable information here. So that would be my advice there.
Now, in terms of if we could focus on the process aspect of that. So when we say gathering customer data or customer intelligence, and obviously we can't say that these things would this particular process that we'll talk through will apply to everyone, but in general, how would you get started with something like that? Because there may be someone listening who says, well, I don't even know what data to collect. Or they may even think, I don't collect any data, when in fact you do have data. You have a name, you might even have an address or an email address, how much a person paid for a product or service. So you have data, but I find that a lot of times people don't think of attributes like that as data, number one. And then secondly, they just don't know what to measure.
Yeah, so you touched on sales a minute ago. And so I strongly believe that if you don't have customers, you don't have a business. So driving that tracking is as critical to the operations of any business that I can imagine. And if I think about it in very simple terms with respect to customers, there's probably depends on your business, but there's three simple buckets that I can think of. There's customers that I wish were my customers that I haven't yet converted. There's customers that are not my customers that I've somehow or another managed to that I have connected with and I managed to unsuccessfully convert to a customer. And then there's my real customers who are my customers and I want to keep them that way. So what do you do with each of those people? You already touched on it. You have the basic data. You have the name, address, telephone number, email address. You have some very easy to identify and obtain basic information about their organization, the size of it, and what kind of things they do. Your business may provide services across a number of different sectors. So you can categorize the customer by sectors. You could categorize that customer by their role within their business. Are they an ultimate C-suite decision maker? Are they at a buyer level that sort of is more transactional? Or are they on the front edge of new projects that are maybe a little bit less reliable or less predictable in terms of what kind of business may come through that? So that to me is a real quick way, and that's a simple CRM model is what that is. And again, you can use a pencil and a clipboard. You're going to probably find pretty quickly that that's not the most effective way to do that. There are a number of tools out there. I use a tool called HubSpot, which is a CRM product out there that I've worked with that I like, and it's got different tiers of from free to different levels, and depending on your organization size, you can find the right spot. But effectively, for no money, you can very quickly start tracking you can build your database of all your customers, you can categorize them, and you can track the number of times that you've reached them. And that's your start. And then you can then you can start to develop, you know, the basic sales sort of information that may be hard for people, just to see, well, how many calls does it take before I'm successful with a customer.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you, some other things have come to mind. So, the importance of asking for feedback once a
Yes.
product or service is delivered, because I would imagine that asking for that feedback, or maybe even if you don't explicitly ask for feedback, you can make observations along that customer journey, right? And record those observations. And it could be something as simple as, well, I find that this customer prefers to communicate via email, whereas this customer prefers to communicate face to face or over the phone, or just, it may seem really trivial, but that alone can also, once you start to gather enough of that data and you start to plot it on some type of a graph or a chart, it could actually give you insights into how you might, this is how it would tie into continuous improvement, how you might make some changes to your own internal processes.
It's really true. And I think, as you know, being aware and sympathetic to how busy your customers truly are, I know that my inbox stays very busy, and unsolicited messages or messages at the wrong time generally don't get as much attention from me as I'm sure the sender wishes it did. The ability to thoughtfully gather information from them is really important. So you can track it internally and know the answer. For example, did I deliver my product on time? Did my product meet the quality objectives? So before you send out your question to a customer, you should know the answer to those two questions yourself. And if either one of those was no, then, and that's going to happen from time to time, of course, well, then that does two things. It provides an opportunity to reach out to your customer and let them know you're human and apologize. And it also provides an opportunity to explore what happened so that you can improve on it and not repeat the problem.
Okay, now Adam, you mentioned those internal questions again. Did I deliver on time? And what was that other question?
I think the quality question, so those are two things that come to mind, with any delivery. So was the quality met? Was the timing met?
Yes, indeed. And so it's in terms of metrics, you mentioned being able to track labor. And again, that's generic, that's across the board, it's industry agnostic. Are there any other important metrics that you can think of that people who are in charge of operations need to look at?
Well, if you have any kind of raw materials, I mean, I would just say that in a simple sense, overall budget, of course. So for a manufacturing setting, obviously you have a lot of raw materials that come in. You have logistical costs, you have delivery costs. You may have storage fees that could be either just basic warehouse fees, or in a food setting you've got cold storage or deep frozen storage. There can be a number of other related expenses to a project, commissions, brokerage fees, sometimes special insurance fees. All of those things add up. And so if they're part of the normal process of business, I would always track them. And so the key there is that your indicators do what I say, move the needle. You don't want to create a burden of tracking a lot of data that causes your people to lose track of what they're doing in their business. So if it's the small items, spend less time tracking small items than big items is a simple way to say it. So that's why I brought up labor, because that's always a big one.
Yeah. So in other words, measure what matters, because
Measure what
otherwise,
matters.
yeah, you can.
Measure what moves the needle. Absolutely.
Yeah, you can get stuck in analysis paralysis very easily.
It's
That
true, and it's counterproductive, because it will actually become a deterrent to the effectiveness of the unintended consequences of tracking too much data can be bad.
Yeah. Now you mentioned HubSpot as the CRM tool that you use. Are there any other resources that you can recommend where people can learn a little bit more about, again, gathering customer data to improve operations, or just learning more information about continuous improvement and operational excellence in general?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm a big fan of the business model canvas. It's a
Yes.
business model generation book by Alexander Osterwalder, and they have a website called Strategizer that's not spelled the way the Webster would spell it, but Strategeyzer. And there's a lot of great resources on Strategizer, and it's not just the business model canvas, but there's also value proposition design and some other tools that they have online. And their books are reasonable. I would, for anybody that wants to understand the overall business or a new project or a new product, I'd recommend going through that exercise with your team.
Hmm. Okay. Anything else? I know you talked about spreadsheets, ERP systems. Do you have any ERP system of choice? I know there's so many that are out there.
There are so many that are out there that I would say that, an ERP system would be something that is more in tune with manufacturing, but it can be that with the larger service organizations, there are other pieces that fit in to those as well. I mentioned HubSpot for the CRM. There's an ERP program called Fishbowl that is a bolt-on to QuickBooks, and I know a lot of small businesses use QuickBooks for their
Hmm.
financial accounting. So obviously, you can go up the ladder to the NetSuite type of products that are full, sort of the full finance ERP packages, and the capabilities there are much more robust, as are the costs. But depending on the size of the organization, that might be the right answer. Understand that the complexity of the system will dictate the amount of time it takes to get it implemented, for sure. And that's something that should not be underestimated, because it is not unusual to discover as you're going through the process that uh, there will be some changes that are sort of required, that the systems itself sort of cause some re-engineering of the business processes themselves, and that can be stressful to the team.
Absolutely. Or it could be some type of other external factor completely out of your control that causes you to have a shift in your business model, like this pandemic that we're in right now. So
That's
just,
right.
it's always important, especially as small businesses, to remain as agile and lean as possible so that you
Yeah.
can quickly adapt to these changes, because the bigger guys, they can't adapt as quickly and as easily as us owners of smaller businesses can. So,
One other tool, because when you talk about your key performance indicators, every business should ultimately have a real simple dashboard of those 4 or 5 metrics that really move the needle. And again, you can do that with spreadsheet graphs. There's an online platform called Clipfolio, spelled with a K. And I like it because it will take data that's tracked either in an Excel spreadsheet or even a Google spreadsheet, but it puts it all in one place. And there's a subscription fee with that, but it's easy to share. You can create the cloud-based logons and go in every morning and see how things are looking.
I'm glad you mentioned a dashboard, because there's something to be said for being able to see your data, just on one sheet of paper, tell a story. It's either going to tell a story that you like or a story that you don't like. But, you can look at mounds and mounds and mounds of data just in these spreadsheets. But until you start to actually graph it out, you just don't have an appreciation or even categorize it. As I think that was one of the things you mentioned earlier, through something like HubSpot, you can very easily categorize or segment your customers based on different attributes or factors. I can attest to that really quickly. I've been working with a developer for the past several months now on putting together my personal website. And Adam, I had no idea just how much public speaking I had done, because it wasn't until I had to actually assemble all of that information and give it to them. I was like, oh, dear God, because it was spread out all over the place and there was no rhyme or reason to it. And it was buried. This information was just buried into different digital folders. And it wasn't until we brought it all together in one place, and then instead of categorizing it by year, categorizing it by the type. So for example, was this a presentation? Was this a radio show, a podcast show that you did? I just had no idea or no appreciation for just how much I've been out there over the past 15 years. It was really eye-opening.
I'm sure that exercise, that's a good example of why I say just start, because when you go through an exercise like that, you likely started with, well, let me just look at who my clients were. Let me just look at my job list for the last
Exactly.
5 years. And so, okay, I start there, and then I go, okay, well, now I've spent 15 minutes, and I peel back the layers of the onion here a little bit. And what kind of services did I provide, and who did I provide them to, and everything else. And so each time you do that, you gather more information, and that's why I say just start, because if you try to design it all at first without the data, without your information, then chances are you're going to get it wrong. You could bring in an expert and say, hey, design for me how to do this, and then once you get started in it, you realize, well, I really want to know this, or I really want to know that. And so you can, just because you do something today doesn't mean that you can't make your tracking more sophisticated tomorrow if you choose. But if you don't start today, then tomorrow you have no chance of getting more sophisticated. So just get started.
I completely agree with that. And it won't be fun. It won't be pleasant. It will be painful. We should say that, right? But the going back to intelligence, the intelligence that you gain as a result of going through these kinds of exercises, I mean, I don't know if you can put a value, assign an actual value to the benefit that you and your company will gain by going through something like that. So,
I don't think you can't underestimate that or understate it. It's, if you think about, just draw an analogy with a regular business plan or an annual update to your plan, the truth is that as soon as the ink is dry, something like coronavirus can come along and your plan is out the window. But that does not detract whatsoever from the value of the planning exercise, getting together with your team, talking through the successes and talking through the pains and understanding them all and coming up and developing a strategy to address them. That exercise is invaluable.
indeed, it is. How can people get in touch with you, Adam?
Well, they can reach me by email, of course, Adam, ADAM, at nextmesa.com, or they can call me or reach out through LinkedIn. I'm always I work with a lot of developers and attorneys, business owners, things like that. And so being a small business, I'm well suited to work with small to mid-market type organizations. And that's where I like to dig in and try to help people build their businesses. So happy and always looking for more and new introductions.
Well, if you're listening to this, I highly encourage you to reach out to Adam because there's clearly so much more that we could have talked about during this interview, but unfortunately, we've come to that time where we have to start wrapping things up. But definitely look for him on LinkedIn, as well as feel free to send him an email, and we'll kind of run through that right before I officially close. So, what I'd like to do at this time, Adam, is just kind of share some of my key takeaways from things that you've shared with us today. So, started off with you sharing with us your very interesting career journey over the years, from civil engineer to working with real estate developers to running operations for an ice cream company, and now back to Next Mesa, where you are working with attorneys and real estate developers and other small businesses, as well as mid-sized companies. Now, something that you said, there were a lot of really great nuggets of information that I captured during the interview, one of which is, again, regardless of what type of consulting, if you are in the line of doing or providing any type of consulting service, you do your clients or your customers a huge disservice if you don't actually take the time to understand how they operate. Sometimes we get so focused on just trying to make the sell that we actually we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not actually listening to the customer, understanding how they operate and how our product and or service can actually alleviate a pain point for that potential customer or actually help that potential customer make even more money. Adam also shared with us the fact that operations is very interconnected and that we have to understand that our customers or our clients don't always know what they don't know. And that's why it's so important to understand who they are and the fact that our customers can be internal as well as external. Now, something also very interesting that I thought you said, Adam, is that from a COO's perspective, his or her internal customers can be the CEO as well as the CFO, and how you're constantly playing that balancing act, balancing operations with costs and at the same time trying to satisfy the innovation elements that the CEO is actually looking for. And then obviously there are your external customers, but to your point, those customers can be anywhere along a particular supply chain or value chain. I also thought it was really interesting when you said that there are three types of customers, customers that you wish were yours, customers that you were trying to convert but couldn't convert into becoming actual customers. And then there are your, in fact, true actual paying customers. We also talked about some other key metrics as well as internal questions that are very generic enough for all of us to apply to our businesses. And that is, how do we gather the data? How do we actually segment our customer data? We can start by categorizing them by things like gender, not socioeconomic status, or maybe that would apply to your business, but certainly revenue and some of these other key types of attributes. Internal questions: did you deliver on time? Was the quality met? I thought those were all very important things to bring up. And being able to track labor, because as you mentioned, that is usually the largest expense for most of us in business, and making sure that you can always meet your budget. I appreciated the fact that you said when it comes to metrics, obviously you want to measure what matters, and your indicators should always move the needle. So don't get into analysis paralysis. Have that one-page dashboard that you can look at consistently that's going to tell the true story of how your company is actually operating. And lastly, just get started. You have to always think about continuous improvement, and it's hard to know where to start if you don't have a baseline. Wow, these were all amazing gems of information when it comes to gathering customer data, using that data to improve your operations, and just what it means to have that continuous improvement mindset. So thank you again, Adam. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
If you want more details or you want to learn more about the exciting things Adam has going on at Next Mesa, definitely email him. Again, his email address is adam@nextmesa.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn. As a reminder, we will have links to the resources that Adam shared with us in the show notes at businessinfrastructure.tv. Again, that's businessinfrastructure.tv. Do you have a question about operations that you'd like for me to answer live on the show? Then send me a direct message either on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram with your question. And I'm also finally on Facebook too. So just look for me at Alicia Butler Pierre, and you can send me a message there as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, stay focused, be encouraged. This entrepreneurial journey is a marathon and not a sprint. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues with Alicia Butler Pierre. If you like what you've heard, do us a favor and subscribe, leave a rating and review, and more importantly, share with your colleagues and team members who could benefit from the information. Join us next week for another episode of Business Infrastructure with Alicia Butler Pierre.